having me back from McDowell County. We love McDowell County. I wish I could stay. I'm going to go back down the interstate a little later. We've got a PowerPoint presentation. We like PowerPoints because people rather watch pictures than hear a boring speaker. So, Paul, I kind of cheat tonight. I'm going to cheat. And but before I get to PowerPoint, I was asked. I have one of our law enforcement veterans here.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown, could you use the microphone? It's difficult to hear you. Thank you.
They want me to use the microphone.
Thank you.
I've been asked by law enforcement to read a little bit of a story before we start. And here we go. Socialism. You have two cows. Give one cow to your neighbor. That's the definition of socialism according to this. Communism. Let me put my glasses on, you know. This thing gets darker and fuzzier as I go along. Communism. You have two cows. Give both cows to the government, and they may give you some milk. Fascism. You have two cows. You give all the milk to the government, and the government sells it. Marxism, you have two cows. The government shoots you. Excuse me, this is Nazism. You have two cows. The government shoots you and takes both cows. Anarchism, you have two cows. Keep both cows. Shoot the government agent and steal another cow. Anarchy. And capitalism. You have two cows, sell one and buy a bull. How y'all like that? Go around here. So, tonight's topic is going to be on something called Democrat socialism. Let me just say that my daddy was a Democrat, my granddad was a Democrat. They almost had a cow when I became a Republican. I am not bashing good, solid-earth Democrats.
Recording in progress.
But what we're going to be talking about is a very radical philosophy that unfortunately is getting too much, way too much power in this country and threatens our constitutional republic. So we're going to fly through a lot of slides tonight, and we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about some of the tactics. And by the way, there are a lot of good Democrats that don't have a clue as what's going on. Look, let me tell you something. In the last 15 presidential elections in North Carolina, going back to Humphrey v. Nixon in '68, you know how many times Democrats have won the presidency in North Carolina? Twice. Jimmy Carter the first time and Barack Obama the first time. During that period of time, the Democrat Party was the dominant party in the state. Now, in the last few months, we have eclipsed them by just a few votes. But the point of the matter is, it was good, solid-earth Democrats that voted for Nixon, that voted for Reagan, that voted for McCain, that voted for Romney, that even voted for Trump the first time. Most folks don't have a clue as to what's happening here. Unfortunately, this philosophy has taken control, and it needs to be checked. So, with that, we're going to be talking about, and by the way, y'all are welcome to take pictures of any slide you want. This is for educational purposes. And we will email this PowerPoint presentation to anybody that wants one. Just give us your email. We'll take care of it. But we're going to be talking about a couple of things tonight. We're going to be talking about the philosophical base for socialism and how it leads eventually to communism. And we're also going to talk about some of the tactics that have been used. And we're going to go through a couple of books that I want you all to read. I'll just preview them. One is called The Naked Communist by Klaus Schwab, 1952. He was an FBI retired director. Another is Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Some of you know about that. All right, let's see if I can figure out how to get this thing going. I'm going to step across this thing right here. All right. So, moving towards communism. This is an educational presentation. We got to learn the facts. We got to look at history. We got to understand that a lot of this is built on the notion that we need bigger government, more government dependency, and some of that is with a good intention, but the road that it leads down to is a dangerous road. In today's presentation, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some ideological common denominators, by well-meaning Democrats leading into socialism, which leads into more governmental power. We'll look at tactics, and I mentioned the book, Rules for Radicals, and we were going to also look at the modern Democrat Socialist Party and some tyrannical practices. The Democrat Socialist Party is not the Democrat Party. Okay, the problem is that it's got too much power inside the Democrat Party. And the Democrat Party needs to make some changes too, obviously. All right, when somebody says, I'm a progressive, here's what that really means. You're progressing from one point to the other. Usually, It starts with the desire for governmental intervention, the desire for the government to take care of problems, and it moves to more governmental regulation, and it moves to more creation of agencies. And as all this happens, you lead eventually into a socialist situation because the government has so much power, and then into tyranny because it leads to more and more government power. All right, so let's keep going. This is a progress. They want to progress. What happens is eventually it progresses toward, in many cases, an unintended goal of communism. You go find a good Democrat on the street and say, you want to be a communist? Heck no. No, they don't want that. But the problem is, the more government gets control, the more you move into a tyrannical situation. So we're going to look at liberalism, traditional Democrat liberalism, the New Deal, that sort of thing, Great Society, progressivism. Then we move into Democrat socialism, to socialism, and all-out communism. What is the philosophical common denominator between all these? Different labels, but in some cases, the same core ideology. The same core ideology. And that is based on centralized government power. Communism is not really an economic philosophy. It's a tyrannical system based on more and more centralized government power. Agencies, regulations, taking property, and eventually freedoms. You see how it progresses. All right. This is how communism eventually seizes its power. The promise of free, and more free. Free stuff, free goods, as if it is the responsibility of the federal government. In our constitutional system, there is a notion of federalism. You all may have heard of federalism. Federalism doesn't mean a larger federal government. In fact, it means just the opposite. It means that the federal government is to be as small as possible and provide the basic protection to the Union, military, commerce, a federal judiciary, a post office, and others. But the authority and the power is to be vested in the state. I don't always quote a Democrat, but I'll quote one. Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, used to say, all government is local, and that's exactly right. Our North Carolina Constitution requires the General Assembly to provide a public education, and that's where it should be, locally, not from the feds. But this has got turned on its head. And so we're using a central government in Washington to give free, which can only be enforced by agencies and regulations. So it's rob from the evil rich, give to the undeserving poor, but in fact destroy the rich, destroy job creators, and create a utopia which cannot ever exist. And the fact of the matter is that reality hurts. Businesses get closed. You lose jobs. I've been to a communist country, by the way. I've been to Belarus. I've been to the steppes of the Soviet Union. The poverty is off the charts. Inevitably, it leads to an increase in poverty. The utopia becomes a dystopia. This is predicated upon dumbing down the population. I hate to have to say it. But that's what it's predicated on through the control of the educational system. To destroy independent and critical thinking. When's the last time you met critical thinkers coming out of the school system? And I love teachers, and but I don't love the big bureaucracy over the top of our teachers. Through the manipulation of the media, in other words, mass propaganda. Again, the promises never work because this leads only to increased poverty. Some of the results of communism. Anybody ever seen the movie The Killing Fields? You see what Pol Pot did. Went and he shot and killed educated Cambodians. Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong have murdered more people in the 20th century than anybody else. In fact, more than 100 million people dead under communism. That is surpassed only by Sharia, where there's about 270 million people killed under Sharia systems since 670 AD, or whatever the year was. Nazism killed 6 million Jews in World War II. Communism is a murderer of people. Now, it just doesn't happen overnight. It starts with good intentions. At least folks think they're good intentions because they think the government is the solution to problems. And it moves and it moves and it moves and it moves until finally you lost your freedom. It begins with the notion of free stuff. These are the three loud themes that you've got to be careful about. Free stuff from the government, number one. Number two, and we'll see in a moment, some of our Democrat socialist friends attacking private wealth. There's a notion that private wealth is evil. Free stuff from the government, private wealth is evil, and government, not God, not family, not parents, but government knows all. These are three philosophical axes on which this system moves. A false hope of utopia which sows division. Division, divide, distract, destroy, then control. I heard Paul a moment ago talking about what happened in 2020 with these riots all over the country. Maybe we'll talk about those in a second. But let's understand the tactics. So we're moving from looking at some of the common philosophical denominators, free stuff, government knows best, wealth is evil, to the tactics. And those tactics are based upon division. Tyranny occurs, note this, under steps 2 and 3. Progressivism is what you have really with the Great Society and Franklin Roosevelt loved the country, but he had a screwed up idea about how to help things because there was an explosion in the government, and that's when the whole deep state began. But he wanted to win the war, so you don't have absolute tyranny when these systems start. But then it moves into socialism and communism, both of which tyranny is born. Take this for example. Here's an example of how a tyranny can occur not just under communism, but also socialism. Did you know this? Hitler's political party was the National Socialist. You hear that part? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. There's some radical Democrats that would call us Nazis. They throw that word around like it means nothing, yet at the same time they push socialism. Like the robot said on Lost in Space, it does not compute, because Hitler himself was one of the biggest socialists ever. Patton in North Africa. One of my favorite movies is Patton by starring George C. Scott. Anybody see that movie? 1970, 56 years old. That movie is timeless. And one of my favorite scenes there is when Patton has brought his army into North Africa and Tunisia, and the Tunisian campaign, and they're giving hell to the Germans, and he holds his binoculars up and he says, "Ramon, you magnificent bastard, I read your book." We have to read the book, the playbook of the enemy. And so we're going to do that to a degree tonight, just a bit. Sometimes we've got to understand what that playbook is. And I would say, when we want to understand the growth of socialism, tyrannical socialism, limited communism in America, I'm going to recommend 2 books. One, as I mentioned, is Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. You know who he dedicated that book to, by the way? Does anybody know the answer to that question? Well, Barack Obama used it, but who was the book dedicated to? Yeah, that's right. It was dedicated to Satan. And The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen. Let's look at Rules for Radicals. Rules for Radicals talks about the tactics. Not so much the philosophy, some of that, but it is about the tactics. You look at Alinsky's tactics. 1, pick the target. The police are the target. Okay? 2, organize. Defund the police. Isolate the target. Agitate. Create a crisis. Demand action. Use the media. Keep the pressure on. Divide the people. Whether it's racially, politically, whatever. Division. Division and chaos is a modus operandi of Satan himself, isn't it? Certainly isn't unity. And it goes on and on and on and on. I want to talk to you a bit about what happened with George Floyd, because I have read the Hennepin County coroner's report, and I've watched over an hour of videotape of George Floyd before he was put on the ground. If you read the Hennepin County coroner's report, you will see that George Floyd had more than 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. More than 3 times. And fentanyl is about 100 times more deadly than heroin. Don't quote me exactly, but it's the most deadly thing you can get. The sheriff will tell you that. These kids, they just accidentally ingest it. They don't even know they got it. It kills them dead. I've been to funerals myself of kids who this has happened to. And Floyd had 3 times the legal limit according to the Democrat coroner's report in Hennepin County. There was nothing in the coroner's report showing any contusions. In other words, no bruises on his neck. Nothing to show that he had lost his life from anything other than fentanyl overdose. You think, well, but the officer, Derek Chauvin, had his knee on George's neck. That was not a good look. But let me tell you this. If you watch 1 hour of that video, you'll see that the police have, they call them Axon body cameras. And George Floyd was one of 3 defendants. He was sitting like in the Lincoln Navigator. They go over, they want to take him out, they want to talk to him. He doesn't cooperate. They say, put your hands at 10 and 2. In other words, put your hands on the steering wheel so we know you don't have a gun. He did not cooperate. Finally, he got his hands up. And finally, about 5 or 6 officers start get him out of the vehicle and take him across the street. He's fighting. They get him in the back of the police cruiser. And in the back of the police cruiser, you can hear him start to say 7 times, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. 7 times. I'm not making this up. They want you to think he says he can't breathe because of the officer's knee. It's a bunch of bull. And not only does he say, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. He starts saying this, put me on the ground, put me on the ground, put me on the ground. So they took him out of the vehicle and put him on the ground. The officer executed a maneuver that the optics of the maneuver are not good. But did they tell you what I just told you? Heck no, they didn't tell you what I told you. What they did, they took him saying on the ground, I can't breathe, after he's already said it 7 times, and they isolated about a 10-second video and made the public believe the officer had killed George Floyd. I was speaking at a Republican, the York County, South Carolina Republican Party gathering alongside the solicitor down there. They have solicitors down there, and solicitor and I were talking about the case, and he said that case in York County should never have been prosecuted. But they used it as an excuse to divide and to isolate and to attack the police. And to defund the police movement was based on a detestable lie. This is a communist tactic. And those riots were the most expensive riots in American history. The defund the police movement were born from those riots. We had our own former governor, what's his name, running for Senate? What's the guy's name running for Senate? Is that his name? Going out marching with these folks, marching in solidarity with the defund the police movement. It's chaos. It is absolutely chaos based upon radical rhetoric. And I want you to understand this. The radical rhetoric is led by the notion that our democracy is in danger. Trump's going to take down our democracy. We have Republicans say our democracy. Sean Hannity, a friend of mine, gets on my nerves and our democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. I'm going to tell you this. This is a fundamental difference we have got to learn if we're going to save our freedom. James Madison, the principal author of the United States Constitution, said this. He said, democracy is the most vile, V-I-L-E, form of government. That is the author of the Constitution, the principal author of the Bill of Rights. John Adams, our second president, said that democracies eventually commit suicide. And the best one is from Ben Franklin, who said a democracy is like 2 wolves and a lamb meeting at high noon and voting on what they're going to have for lunch. We have got to understand that a constitutional republic is not based on mob rule. It's based on checks and balances and rule of law. 2 3-letter phrases. If you don't take any checks and balances, rule, that's what a republic is. We have got to know and understand the difference. What you saw when the radicals tried to take the country off the blocks during the George Floyd riots is a classic example of democracy. It is mob rule. And we had, unfortunately, Democrat district attorneys and police chiefs that let them get away with it in those cities. Should never have happened. But that is mob rule without a check. If you want to see a picture of what a constitutional republic looks like, look at the civil rights movement, in which Martin Luther King and others stood for their rights, not only in the Constitution, but the God-given rights that are our natural rights, and they did not make their demands by destroying property, by lighting businesses on fire, by taking money from groups. By the way, you know these groups were agitated. They hung in there, and they used checks and balances, and yeah, they got some pushback, but things were made better. That's a picture of what a constitutional republic should look like. George Floyd versus Martin Luther King. So anyway, I want you all to read that book. I want to talk a little about the naked communists. Cleon Skousen was a law enforcement professional. He became the assistant director of the FBI, moved his way up, and was seeing communist tactics, even in the 1950s. And he wrote this book, which has turned out to be eerily prophetic. For the 1950s, the communists play the long game. And here are the areas that they try to capture. And I want you to think about these 7 areas as we go through this and proceed. We want to capture the government, control education. This is written in 1952. Control the media. Any of this sound familiar? Destroy religion. And of that, the target is our Judeo-Christian base. They don't care about Islam and other stuff. In fact, they welcome that because eventually Sharia will eat up the socialists and the communists and everybody else. Now, I'm not talking about that tonight. Maybe we'll come back and do that. But when they want to destroy religion, they want to attack Judeo-Christianity. Destroy the family so that government has the answer, not the family issue. Control the economy, disarm the population. Let's look at some of this. Capture the government. How have they done this? They've done it through the creation of the deep state. As I mentioned a moment ago, you can historically look to the explosion of the deep state in 3 historical moves. The first is in the 1930s under FDR with the New Deal, when we create hundreds of agencies and thousands of government employees who start to create regulations that you and I have to obey and are not elected. It exploded even more under LBJ in the 1960s with the Great Society. More agencies, more regulations. Regulations that are laws by unelected bureaucrats. And the coup de grace, perhaps, was during Obamacare. They call it the Affordable Care Act, but you understand what they say is the opposite of what it is. It's actually been the Astronomical Cost Act. It was big government getting in bed with big insurance. Who here can say, if you paid for health insurance before your health insurance comes down, who here can say the delivery of health care services has gotten faster and more efficient? It was a governmental takeover of health care. But here's the problem. While these Democrat Congresses, these Democrat presidents created a deep state that is going to threaten our freedom, our problem is that our Republican response has been too weak. It's been too weak. You see here a list of some of the Republican speakers, going all the way back to, I swear I've got to put my glasses on because I can't see them. Who did a good job? Dennis Hastert, John Boehner, Eric Cantor, Boehner again. You know, these Republican Congresses come in, and what they'll do some good things. Usually we'll get some tax cuts. Usually we'll see some deregulation. But that's only as good as they're in there because it comes right back. So look, here's a question. We got a Republican president. We got a Republican Congress. And yet, we still have a federal Department of Education. Why is this? Can anybody... You see, this is why both parties have failed us. The Democrat Party has, in fact, blown us up to the point that we're on the verge of tyranny. The Republican Party sits on their can and doesn't dismantle the deep state. Listen, I can speak 2 or 3 languages. Yeah, Gavru Peruski. That's Russian and in a redneck accent. Who's that Trejoli? That's French in a redneck accent. You know? Kaki Pajivai. But not one federal bureaucrat ever taught me 1 word of Russian or French. You see what I'm saying? So why do we still have it? And it just starts there. You know, when Elon Musk came in, he recommended eliminating 3/4 of all federal agencies because the states can do the job. Can anybody name 1 agency that a Republican Congress has ever eliminated? And if Jennifer were here tonight, I will get on the case. Say that again.
USAID.
USAID. That's a good answer that was created by executive order, not by the Congress. So the president can gut it, you see. But it's a good try, it's a good answer. But where we got to cut that. Let's keep going. Congress has got to eradicate the deep state. Negative comments number 2, control education. And you see Jimmy Carter there signing the act creating the Department of Education. The hard facts are that since the creation of the Department of Education, our test scores for our kids have dropped. We have become less competitive, especially against our Pacific Rim competitors, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, you name it, name it, name it. Nothing has gotten better, and what we have seen is attempts at top-down control through Common Core and this sort of thing. I've done thoughts on Common Core. Common Core, by the way, was a largely the product of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that were driving the bus there. And, you know, if you, they initially had a Stanford professor, Bill Milford, who was involved in the Apollo moonshot. He was over the math curriculum and over the English curriculum with Sandy Stotsky from the University of Arkansas. They both resigned when they understood that Common Core was dumbing the population down to the kids. Ideological indoctrination. I've read some of the proposed readings in Common Core. It's an attack on Western civilization. Prurient books, genderqueer, flamers, some of them are there, sexually experienced materials, and I just point out what Gates does. You follow the money. Goal number 3, control of the media. And let me just explain a little bit what's happened here. President Clinton signs this Telecommunications Act in 1996, which basically took off any limits on the number of stations to be held. And what we have here, we have a monopolistic control with just a few major mega corporations controlling most of national media. Did y'all know that? And they're listed here. I mean, I think maybe I've got them listed in the next slide here. Yeah, Sinclair, Nexstar, Comcast, Paramount, Disney, and News Corp, which of course controls Fox, which used to be conservative, but all that is changing. So that's the way they do that. The attack, goal number 4, to attack and destroy religion. That's been done largely through the courts. Engel v. Vitale took prayer out of school. Addington v. Shemp took the Bible out of school. County of Allegheny takes the nativity scenes out. The United States Supreme Court does not have the authority to abrogate its responsibility under the Constitution. And I could do a whole talk on this, but I could tell you case after case after case after case, the court has decided, for example, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Or even before that, the court had found that black people could not have citizenship. And of course they reversed themselves. But the courts have been used to assault religion, and primarily Christian religion. And not just that, also, but in the schools as well. We've got to step into that goal, and I've got a little pitch here for my 4 friends running for judge. They are all constitutional conservatives who will interpret the Constitution and not write law. Number 5, destroy the family. I want you to think about this. Lyndon Johnson. If you read about him, you'll know he was a racist. If you understand what happened during the Great Society, before the Great Society created all these programs, did you know that black American families had the highest marriage rate, the highest percentage of fathers in the home, and the highest percentage of home ownership? And along comes the Great Society with all its programs, and look what happened afterwards. It goes from top to bottom. The tragedy of the family. Again, this is government intervention. Assault on the family. The welfare system has pushed the deterioration of the nuclear family. It's got to come to an end, and so is the educational system. So, in summary, we're looking at the courts, the education system, welfare state attacking the family, and deliberate federal spending to attack the family. Federally mandated programs for sex transition surgeries. How crazy is that? That's what we're looking at. Control the economy. They do this in a couple of ways. I won't jump too much on the federal banking system with the Federal Reserve. We all know about that, but I want you to understand that one of the ways they're trying to attack it is to collapse the dollar. When you have a $40 trillion national debt, and again, this is where both the Democrat Party and the Republican Party have failed miserably. By the way, you know, when you hear somebody say, well, the debt went up under Trump, true. The debt went up under Biden, true. All that's true. But those comments are made out of a fundamental ignorance of how the Constitution works. It is the United States Congress that is responsible for spending and budgeting. Only the United States Congress can cut spending and cut this. And what's going to happen is the United States became an economic superpower shortly after Bretton Woods, after we won World War II. We put a man on the moon, and every great nation that has ever controlled the face of the earth has had the international currency of trade. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Romans. They had the denarius, you know, the gelding. The Dutch had the gelding. Spanish had the peso. The Brits had the pound sterling. And when that international currency of trade falls, the nations fall. And I'm going to tell you, they want to push poverty. And when the U.S. dollar is no longer international currency of trade, our standard of living will drop through the bottom, and which is what they're pushing. Control the economy. One thing we've got to do also, we have to get aggressive with antitrust. Antitrust is a Republican creation. It is a Republican idea. It was introduced by General Sherman. General Sherman's brother, Senator Sherman from Ohio, introduced it, signed by, in the office by President Harrison, used by Teddy Roosevelt. I'm going to tell you something. My kid was in Afghanistan in the Army. I'm a Navy guy. I'm the only oddball in the family. He was in Kandahar province, the most dangerous section of Afghanistan at the time. But when I was in college at Chapel Hill 100 years ago, my daddy would bust my butt because I'd run up a $50 phone bill. It was called long distance, calling back and forth. He bust my butt. About 50 years later, I'm talking to my son doing a FaceTime on the other side of the world. Not costing me a dime. Why is that? Because Ma Bell got busted up. Understand that big is bad. Big is bad for freedom, whether it's big government or big business. And some have said, to try to stereotype the party, well, the Democrats want big government, Republicans want big business. In fact, both parties want both. And you've got to bust them up. We've got to use antitrust. Blue Cross Blue Shield should be busted up. You should not have to have one insurance carrier to shop for your health insurance. Duke Power should be busted up. Monopolies have got to go. And finally, disarm the population. They tried to disarm the population through gun control, the National Firearms Act, a bunch of stuff they tried to do. Our Second Amendment was based upon the Swiss model. Did y'all know that? William Tell, William Tell over to her. Did I get that right? You did that right. Shooting the air off the head. But the Swiss have had a militia system for over 1,000 years. They got invaded once in 1789 by the French. But let me tell you something. If you look at what happened during World War II, the liberals and the gun haters will tell you that if you look at the height of Nazi power in World War II, it was all red. The Nazis controlled everything from the English Channel all the way back to the Russian front, with the exception of Switzerland. And the gun haters will tell you, well, that's because they had Hitler's money. I want you to know that's a lie from the pit of hell. The fact of the matter is that Hitler hated the Swiss. He called it the pimple on the face of Europe. And he ordered his generals to come up with an invasion plan. And y'all can fact check me on this. They came up with a plan called Operation Tannenbaum to invade Switzerland. Hitler's generals talked them out of it because the Swiss had guns and it would be too bloody. That's a fact. The results of disarmament, look what happened in the Soviet Union. Take up guns, murder millions. Look what happened in Nazi Germany. I remember when Dan Quayle and Lloyd Benson were debating. Dan Quayle wasn't quite ready for prime time, and Lloyd Benson, he was a different animal. But Lloyd Benson was saying, nobody needs our AR-15 to go deer hunting. Excuse me, Senator, it's not about deer hunting, and it never was about deer hunting. They haven't gotten us there yet. And we have to hold our own. So, let's push on here. We have federal agencies. By the way, federal agencies, think about ATF, for example. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. The Constitution allows us to control alcohol and tobacco through the Commerce Clause. But firearms are guaranteed by the Second Amendment. How would you like to have a federal agency called Religion, Free Speech, and Freedom of the Press that the Justice Department is overlooking that? We've got to think critically about these things. Democrats, Socialists of America. Here we go. DSA platform, a boss, the U.S. Senate, a boss, the Electoral College. By the way, the Electoral College is one of the greatest checks and balances in the U.S. Constitution. If it weren't for the checks and balances, if it weren't for the Electoral Colleges, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago would determine who our presidents are. Replace the presidency, replace the Supreme Court, write a new constitution. This is what they're pushing, and they're basically pushing free stuff for everybody. Let's take a look at some of these folks. These are, you know, they're not mainstream Democrats, so to speak. I'm not sure that we have too many left. John Fetterman, to his credit, standing against them. But you've got Bernie Sanders, you know, hates billionaires, you know, AOC. You know, every one of these people want total government control. Rashida Tlaib, who's no longer in Congress, Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar. How somebody named Zohran Mamdani get elected mayor of New York City 20 years after 9/11? And this guy here, the Democrat nominee for the Senate in Michigan, says he's not a socialist, but yet Medicare for all, abolish ICE. These are his positions endorsed by Bernie and AOC. Bernie Sanders, I don't think billionaires should exist. A tax on wealth. AOC, capitalism is irredeemable. A tax on wealth. Rashida Tlaib, we must start choosing people over profit. No capitalism. Jamal Bowman, I believe our current system of capitalism is slavery. Democrat socialists call capitalism slavery by another name. Ilhan Omar, I don't know why she's in the country, why she's a member of Congress. We need to amend the Constitution. You've got to be a natural born citizen. As long as our economic and political systems prioritize profit, we will perpetuate inequality. Mamdani, I don't think we should have billionaires. But look at this. Check this out. You walk over here so I can see. Because my eyes can't see it. Here you have Bernie Sanders. Still away with billionaires. His net worth on a salary of $170,000 a year goes from $330 to $6.7 million. You know, he hates wealth, but look at it. How about AOC here, Sandy as they call her? Comes into Congress $27,000, now worth an estimated $5.6 million. These are basically, we're getting these numbers from the House and the Senate financial disclosures. Rashida Tlaib comes in $48,000, leaves at almost $3 million. Jamal Bowman comes in with $141,000 at $3 million. We don't know about Mamdani yet. That's just a startup. And it goes on and on. Now, here are 5 more clowns, the same thing. Come in with little, they preach against wealth, and yet they get wealthy themselves. How can this be? A number of reasons. Okay, what can we do about it? It's time to take action. Got to get educated. I want people to read their tactics. And then, and by the way, y'all can get this video if you want, but I want everybody to think about these areas, these 7 areas, and ask, how can I step forward? Moms for Liberty, you want to get involved in education, school board, running for office? What is it? Ask that question, and let's get involved. That brings us to the close of my PowerPoint. I'm happy to answer a couple of questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
I think we've got a dual attack from the Muslim world and the communist world. They're working together.
A dual attack?
It's a dual attack.
Uh-huh.
They showed in Dearborn, Michigan, they had a march with 1,500. They had a march showing 1,500 to 2,000 Muslim military-age men marching. They're showing us they're here. Obama came in working for the Saudis. He had the Muslim Brotherhood over 400 times in the White House. I think some of the reason that our military intelligence was so upset with Obama was they knew he was a traitor. So we've been sold out to the Muslims. We've been sold out to the commies.
Well,
when are we going to stand up?
When we get educated and understand what's happening. And in fairness, it wasn't Obama that turned education on it. It was bad enough. It was Lyndon Johnson with a thing called the Hart-Celler Act in 1965, when the Democrats said that they called our immigration system, what was it? Discriminatory. As if you can discriminate against a non-citizen. Anti-discrimination applies to American citizens. So we reduced the number of European immigrants and increased the number of immigrants from third world countries, primarily Sharia countries. And then came, alongside that, chain migration, where you bring everybody and their brother in, an H-1B visa. And let me tell you something. If we get the Save America Act passed, but don't reform legal immigration to stop mass immigration from Sharia countries, in fact, put a pause on immigration, that's like locking the back door and keeping the front door wide open. So you hit a good point.
I want to invite Paul up for the question and answer session, so that if you guys have questions for Paul, that he's more than happy to answer them. So we're going to stay on topic, please, with our questions. I know that there's a lot of things that were discussed, but in order to give everyone time to ask their questions and have some time, again, ask the question, raise your hand. I want you to please state your name and then who the question is directed to. So let's go.
Yeah, Jason Raybook. And question first is, are you familiar with the book, The Dirty Dozen by Robert Levi?
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who know, it's about 12 cases of the Supreme Court that expanded government and sub-cases that helped with that. Great book. So my question is, as part of this takeover, we know a lot of what Trump's been fighting, everything we're fighting has been these radical courts. So how do we take those courts back? That would be...
First off, understand that the Constitution, at Article 3, gives the United States, y'all hear me? The Constitution in Article 3 begins with the judicial power of the United States shall be vested, listen to this, in one Supreme Court, and such other inferior courts as Congress from time to time shall ordain the steps. Congress has the power to rein these courts in fact, can rein the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Congress has been a failure. It created this monster of a deep state, and we haven't eradicated it. But the answer lies in Congress, and we've got to put pressure on Congress to do that.
Don't be shy. How do we do that?
Well, you're going to have a new congressman, I hope, named Jennifer here. You got to get Jennifer on board. You know, you got to get Ted Budd on board. We know he'll be in the Senate. We got to put pressure on our members of Congress. The problem with Congress is it's become an incestuous fundraising deal. That the Senate's on vacation. At least put in a modified filibuster, a standing filibuster, to give some of these things a chance. But you gotta organize. You gotta keep talking. You gotta do the best you can. I mean, it's easier said than done. What I'm telling you right now about the Congress having the power to flip the courts, I'll guarantee you 95% of the members of Congress don't even know that. But we got to get educated and help them to understand.
Annie?
Here.
Say your name, hon.
Hi, I'm Annie Dance. I am a conservative journalist. We do exist. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, and maybe advice for the new deputy chief on how all this intersects with policing in modern McDowell County and Western North Carolina. Thank you. And that's to either of you if you want to speak on the issue.
This is his area of expertise. Go ahead, Paul.
I was hoping you were going to answer.
Now let him share when the time comes up. Just another new guy.
Say that again for me one time so I can make sure.
Sure. I'm curious, what do you see about this topic in McDowell County? I may have missed some of your beginning of your speech. I apologize. So you may have touched on that. But I'm curious, after listening to Mr. Brown speak, what takeaway did you get from it for policing going forward?
Well, as I said earlier, that some of these issues we're not absolved to them. I mean, we've seen some of the ripples at a smaller level here, but I will say it is a blessing to work here because I do feel a strong support in our community, which is very nice. you don't have to travel very far on Interstate 40 to go somewhere where it feels very different to do what I do. So I think it's very important as a community that we stand behind all of our emergency services, all of them, to include supporting them. We talk about the whole defunding. Obviously, the polar opposite is what we need to be doing. We need to be pouring resources into our public safety and our emergency services so that we can continue to enjoy things. So I think that's really the most important thing is just to stand behind these local governments, county commissioners, and people that are going to be, when we come asking for things, they're the ones that got to raise their hands. So when we come doing that we get that support.
These guys lay their lives on the line for us every day, and we can't thank them enough.
Does McDowell have the 287G program? 287G program, you arrest someone and you call ICE. They go through a list, you find out they are not a citizen, and then it's a direct transfer to ICE, who picks them up and deals with them. So, I know we have it in Henderson County, we almost lost it until the sheriff tried to deal with us and decided that it was better to keep the 287G than to try and deal with us.
Oh, yeah. So I apologize for the face. I wasn't sure what that verbiage was, but I guess if the question is if we are cooperating with ICE as far as detainers, I can't think right off the top of my head because I didn't come prepared with that material. Was that House Bill is 318 maybe, but I may be wrong on that. But ultimately, yes. So we do have 287. Yeah. But yes, we are cooperating with them. I mean, essentially, anytime that we can't identify whom if they are a legal resident or not, we have an actual process in our detention facility, and we are cooperating with that. Cool.
It keeps going off. Is there an anonymous hotline number or something to call in? If you know there's like a house full of illegal people?
I don't think there's an anonymous line for that. No. Oh, Tim, what's really occurring right now is folks that are breaking other laws, that are whether that's a DWI or anything that gets them into the detention facility, and we can't establish if they're a legal resident or not. That's really what's putting them into that on our radars. Not so much tips.
You actually call ICE and
So-
make them aware of.
It's not actually so much a phone call; it's a system. But yes, so there's a system in place that immediately they're fingerprinted and it is sent to immigration, and they have to respond within a certain amount of time.
Actually, 287 was designed to do something else. It's designed to make every police force in the United States an active member pursuing national goals. Just like the Public Officer Safety Act of 2003 that Bush signed in 2004. That had been something that we in law enforcement had promoted for 10 years before that, but it only happened because of 9/11. Because the federal government recognized they could instantly have a 1 million-man army helping them prevent terrorism. Same thing with 287. I asked your former boss about this too. 287 really is about taking a proactive stance, and that is when you make a traffic stop and you get signs that, well, nobody speaks English, right? Take it a little farther. Take it a step farther. Is there an offense you can run them through the system for? And then if there is, then if you determine that there's a good suspicion, a probable cause, that they're an illegal alien, the next step is to find out if they've got an A number, right? Okay. I wanted to ask something else. And this is also something I addressed to your former sheriff. Sheriffs in North Carolina have a tremendous amount of authority, individual authority in the county. I had asked him once after a board meeting, could you empower a local black rifle militia said, what would happen if 20 people with automatic weapons just took over Marion streets one time? What would you do? Well, he says, well, first, you have to imagine, he saw a bubble over my head saying, this is weird, right? What a crazy question. I said, what would happen? He said, well, we have an armored car. I said, oh, well, suppose the same thing happens simultaneously in Old Fort, right? Do you have 2 armored cars? And I'm asking that to you. Pass that on to your chain of command. Why not enact locally a militia? I want to take that one step farther. You probably know about the name Gordon Chang. Gordon Chang is an author, China expert. He's often on Fox News, Newsmax. He said this past week, he said, you know, when the war begins with China, it won't begin in the Taiwan Straits. It'll begin right here with the tens of thousands of cells of Chinese servicemen who are already in the country, in this country. What will we do then? He isn't always right, by the way, but he makes a very good point that there are over 1 million people across our southern border, in our northern border, who are considered gotaways. It's a major, major problem. And my personal opinion is we ought to be more concerned about the defense of the country of the United States. Comment?
Real quick, I would just say, as far as if we have a situation that arises that would exceed our abilities, that same network of sheriffs that you're speaking of, I'll use Helene for an example. We utilize mutual aid for all kinds of things. We can essentially, that mutual aid gives them the authority. We're giving them the authority inside of this county to act on our behalf. So if we have to increase our numbers, we would generally reach out to other law enforcement agencies because they would have the equipment and training that we would need to deal with the situation. Hopefully that answers that a little bit.
Let's make this the second to last question. I'm going to do you and then you ask Laura.
Testing. My concern is that young people today are being lulled by the Democratic Socialists of America. And we can see it happening in places like New York or Minnesota. There seems to be an interest with the Gen Zers in socialism. It's promising them things that they're not getting from the current system, or they wouldn't be lulled by this. So my question is, how do we turn that around where young people aren't lulled by socialism, that they understand that America can be a place where they can succeed? That's it. Yeah, that's the Don.
Okay, let's start with North Carolina General Assembly. Remember what I said a minute ago about our state constitution mandates that the General Assembly provide a public education? The General Assembly supersedes school boards. General Assembly has the ability to dictate curriculum. We must, and I've talked to members who are friends of mine in the General Assembly. First of all, we need to teach the Constitution and the Federalist Papers together, ages from K through 12, and make it a prerequisite for graduation. 2, we need to teach American exceptionalism as a good thing. It needs to be mandated. 3, we need to understand, yeah, you can go ahead with that if you want. We need to teach that certain philosophical systems are ineffective and evil. Communism, socialism, Nazism must be taught as evil to our kids. And fascism. And we need to embrace our Judeo-Christian heritage. The North Carolina General Assembly can take control of this. It's not going to be done overnight. I was at a Q&A the other night with a member of a General Assembly, and a good guy, got questions, and talking about teacher pay and this, that, and the other, and somebody asked a well-intentioned question, what about the reading levels? Yeah, reading levels important. You want them up. You want math up and everything up. But you've got to teach American exceptionalism. You've got to teach freedom. You've got to teach there's a difference between right and wrong and good and evil. it's not some kind of a gray area, or else they'll jump into it and they'll push the socialist stuff.
This will be our last question.
Yeah, just a quick question and thoughts on how to deal with, one of our biggest problems, you brought up rules for radicals, and Rule 5 of that is ridicule, their strongest weapon, as they call it. And we've seen how a lot of our politicians have become cowards. Under Obama, we're all called racist every time we talked about Obama. And I've had debates with people how, obviously the playing defense, oh, I'm not racist, doesn't work. So do you think it's better in those cases to just ignore those people, or to clap back on the people, pointing out their racism, those type of things? Because I've had debates with people, which of those is more effective.
You saw me earlier quote General Patton. I believe the best defense is good offense. You knock them off their heels with the truth. And if they call you a racist, it isn't just because you criticize Obama that you're racist. You're a racist if you're a conservative. You're a racist if you want to abolish the Department of Education. It's like the boy that cried wolf. We have to go on the offenses and take the enemy out, because if we don't, we're going to lose this constitutional republic that we have. Paul used a phrase when he was speaking earlier. He was talking about a pendulum swinging. Remember using that phrase? It's apropos. The pendulum from the Democrat Socialists is, hey, this is a razor-thin majority that we have. We got to be bold and speak the truth. The truth attracts people. Government is not the answer. God is the answer. And government has its role, even in the Bible. I think it's Romans 14. Government has its role, but it isn't to be a mama, a daddy, a babysitter, and a whatever else. It's to get out of the way and let the people decide. And that's what we got to be very, very, very bold in going on the offensive. That's my belief. Got another one, Paul.
Well, it might be for you.
Fun never ends.
I'm just curious, is this on? Why do they have to raise so much money in the Senate and the House? I mean, it seems like the day they walk in, they're raising money and that's all they think
Well,
about.
right. Well, if you think about what we said earlier, we have monopolies. There's monopoly within the, you have 7 mega corporations controlling the airways. We ran an aggressive Senate campaign for over a year and outworked everybody. We got our message out and we used social media, but we didn't have the money to buy, major TV time. And there are no restraints on what can be spent, but it goes, we got to have a situation where you got to have more media outlets, not just 3 or 4, and they're going to control who spends what, because everything becomes monopolistic. And the ultimate purpose is to perpetuate the status quo, perpetuate this deep state, keep adding agencies and regulations and keep driving the debt up. Listen, I saw somebody post the other day, he said, I'm done with politics. I'm done. Well, that's exactly what the enemy wants to hear. I'm done. None of us have all the answers. We know we're called to fight, and there's power in truth. That's the best I can say.
We actually do have more time.
Oh, boy.
Anyone? Question? Comment?
I have a comment, Tina. Don, you're a big guy on statistics, and I got this from it's not on. Talking about statistics, I got this from the John Locke Foundation yesterday, and it says that in a recent Cato YouGov poll shows that 62% of Americans aged 18 to 29 have a favorable view of socialism, and 34% have a favorable view of communism. So you are 1,000% correct. We have got to charge and challenge our boards of education to educate people on who we are and who we need to be. And there was a Rasmussen report survey confirms this dangerous trend is deepening. It finds that 51% of voters aged 18 to 39 say they'd like to see a Democratic socialist win the next presidential election. That's how serious this is.
Well, it's the real pandemic is a pandemic. The real pandemic is a pandemic of ignorance. You have these younger people that think the government's going to give them goodies, and it works. But because we're not teaching what happened in Venezuela or Cambodia or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, they don't know any better. We have got to take it on ourselves. Yes, ma'am, Tina.
I would like for you to address the fact that every historical application of socialism, communism in the history, how it has, the outcome of that and what caused it. Because one of the DSA's, their talking points or what they wish to accomplish is the eradication of capitalism. And that, take that statement and apply it to historical communism through Venezuela, through Korea and those.
Well, sure. Look at North Korea, the hermit kingdom, run by communists, one of the poorest. Listen, it is predicated upon a lie. Abolish capitalism. These crazy Democrat socialists from Bernie Sanders, the AOC, Rashida Tlaib, oh, we hate billionaires, we hate wealth. And every one of them could fire me up and spit me out, you know what I mean? Because you understand, when you look at the end result of communism or any tyrannical system, you have a very small handful of very wealthy and powerful. The thing that scares the socialists the most, test. The thing that scares socialists the most is a functioning middle class. It doesn't matter. The functioning middle class is what scares them. Small business scares them. We won World War II with small business, not with huge corporations. Mussolini, and you know, when you look at fascism or Nazism, or communism, there are some differences in the way you look at the economic structure, you know, but at the end of the day, you're talking tyranny and poverty. So Mussolini said, for example, he said that corporatism is the cornerstone of fascism. What's that mean? That means I'm going to let you be a private company, Bank of America, but you're going to do everything I do. You're going to force your people to take jabs. You're going to force them to wear a mask. You're going to force them to sit back and undergo all kinds of, you know, indoctrination that is woke. You see, it is so the result. You can't have if you take away capitalism, you take away incentive. You take away incentive, people don't go to work. People don't go to work, they get poor.
There's no production.
There's no production, right? And that's what's got to be taught. Tina, pick out of this.
Are legals able to purchase firearms legally? Are illegals able to purchase firearms?
Not a legal purchase. They would not be able to purchase them legally. I mean, you know, from an individual, it does, obviously we couldn't prevent that.
They could get driver's license, right? They couldn't do that?
Not without proper documentation, no. They're not going to be able to get a driver's
Are they
license.
able to enforce? Anymore?
Certain states can.
They've got like certain things are allowed, but I mean, if you just kind of a blanket answer to.
They could buy to the illegal.
I don't think this is working very well, so if you could just speak up, I appreciate it.
I read a biography of the Warburg family, the family that did the central bank in Germany before they came here and started the Fed in America. Warburg was at Jekyll Island. Well, anyway, Max talked about running a combine in Soviet Russia and keeping Ukrainian women in barns. And he's the same guy on our Fed.
Well, understand that
Max Warburg.
you know, it was Rockefeller himself said giving control of a nation's currency, and I don't care what laws you pass. And if you look at the history of the United States, there were at least 3 nearly wars over the establishment of a central bank. The Democrats talk about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is one of the biggest, Andrew Jackson is one of the biggest opponents of a central bank. And even Thomas Jefferson said that a centralized bank is like a standing army. You know, And the power that those private institutions have, and we still cannot audit them, is off the charts. And Congress created the Federal Reserve Act. Congress has the power to audit. Congress has the power to force it to change its policies with regard to interest rates. But Congress isn't using that power. See, when power is grabbed, it's hard to grab it back. Just like courts. You have courts. In fact, I'm working on a possible book on this. You have many, many courts stepping outside their judicially granted authority. Courts should have no authority over U.S. military. Courts should have no authority over immigration because the Constitution leaves that to the Congress and the President. But they take power and we do nothing about it because, again, our pandemic is a pandemic of ignorance. We've got to know better.
So in regards to education, in Henderson County.
Troublesome microphone.
Okay, so I'm Henderson County, and about 5 years ago, we were looking very closely at budgets for various things here in North Carolina. Henderson County has about 10,000 students and a budget of $150 million. That's 15,000 per student, right? And only 50 million comes from the county. Now, where does the other 100 million come from? I'm just saying it's all about the money, and we have to pay closer attention to what's going on. I attended a meeting here in the school board here in North Carolina, in Buncombe County, and the state had just passed that rule that the local teachers had to inform the parents if their kids wanted to change their orientation.
Right. The Parental Bill of Rights that
Right.
Billy Cooper vetoed.
Exactly. So what happens? They had about 50 trans people show up, and the board failed. And they said, we are going to maintain the students' ability for privacy against the state rule. I'm just telling you, there's something wrong.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the state of North Carolina has the authority to step in and take over the Henderson County School Board. It's got that authority. So when are you going to do it? That's the question. And of course, those school board members can be voted out there to define the law. We attended a hearing in Raleigh back in January involving the Orange County School District that had deliberately defied the law, and the members of the General Assembly brought them in. But the General Assembly's got to step in on this education thing.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what you spend. By the way, a lot of that money is money we gave to the feds. They're giving it back to us additionally. Most of us probably would say it doesn't matter how much we spend if we're not teaching the right thing.
Exactly.
If we don't teach American exceptionalism, the Constitution, you may as well forget it, whether we've got a high budget or a low budget, because we're headed down a bad trail.
I wanted to ask Paul real quick. We had spoken a little bit before you were up on the microphone about how some of the ideas with dealing with volatile people, talk about defunding the police, and one of the ideas from a liberal standpoint is to take social workers in and have them ride along with police. Could you speak to the actual practicality and what that looks like in play, and maybe you've got an experiential thing that you can talk about, but what do you face when you go into a situation where you don't know what's happening?
I don't even know if is it working?
It is.
Okay. That's a pretty big question. So I can't say that I've had much experience with anything other than actually working with social workers in their, in the parameters of their normal job. So they obviously have a place because there's things and services they can provide that we're not as best equipped for. But that's kind of the point, right? They're better equipped for certain things. We're better equipped for certain things. You can't replace us with them, vice versa. And so they have their place, but I mean, the thing about it is I go into a situation and I'm, with my experience and training, I'm reading body language, I'm trying to prepare myself for the potential of something that they would not. We don't want people to get hurt on either end of a situation. So I don't see any practical application of trying to replace law enforcement in any way.
Let me add that the idea of social workers accompanying police on bus is one of the most naive, idiotic, liberal ideas we've ever heard. I swear, you know, when I was in law school, we had to ride with the Raleigh Police Department as part of criminal procedure. It's a scary, you know what thing. You stick those social workers in there going into drug busts, they're going into fights, they're in the way. And they create a danger not only to themselves, but the officers have to think about it. It's just dumb, liberal thinking. And it should just be, he's very diplomatic. You're very diplomatic, Mr. Sheriff. But I'm going to call it like it is. Crazy. I know he will. I know he will. He's a very kind gentleman, but I'm just helping him out a little
Someone
bit.
with some
He
experience.
has some experience in that.
Yeah, I do. I spent 20 years on the Wichita Police Department, retired 20 years ago. I spent my last 4.5 years working with a social worker. We were investigating child molesters. They're great, except you don't want them in the patrol car with you. You don't want them answering, you know, robberies, homicides, shootings, domestic violence, because they don't have the experience. They're going to hinder what we wanted to do as law enforcement.
They're gonna get hurt.
I've had 4.5 years of experience with it. And I just want to add, we've got some pocket copies of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence over there. If we talked about education on the Constitution, we've got some copies over there if you want to pick one up. There we go.
Anyone else have any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Green light should be at the bottom.
Thank you, Tina. Mr. Brown, I'd like to ask you if you would briefly speak to successful economies in countries like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland who operate under a democratic capitalist economy and also offer broad social protections and public services. Could you speak to that just briefly,
Well,
please?
you use the phrase successful. You use the phrase successful economy. I don't buy that. What you have is the government owning things. You have taxation rates at 80%. You have the government taking most of what you make. There's a disincentive to do things. There's a reason the United States is the principal power in NATO. It's because we're a capitalist system, not because we're a socialist system. Those countries you're talking about have milked off the United States for years because we are a capitalist superpower. So while I appreciate the question, I don't agree with the philosophy they are successful economies. You can't have a successful economy when the government is taking and taking and taking some more. That's what I call stealing, legalized stealing.
Those countries have also opened up their markets to a capitalistic percentage. There's a certain part of their systems that are capitalistic that brings in money. So
Well, it's because they know that socialism doesn't work. It creates poverty. You don't want those nations protecting you when the Russians attack or the Chinese attack or anybody else attack. They are weak seven sisters that depend on American capitalism to survive. That's what I would say.
China did the same thing. They were
Right.
completely under Mao, under that communist system, and then they went and realized that that didn't work with the deaths, and they opened up to a capitalist, that they had to open up their markets. So the capitalistic market being completely gone has never worked in any application of communism in the history of civilization.
Well, I just wanted to comment. You make a great attorney general.
Well, like Reagan said to Carter, there you go again.
Did I just hear you announce for the next election?
Wait, careful, we have a journalist here.
You just hang tight.
Just like, I'll get Are we all satiated?
I have one final question. Now that we have our district attorney-elect in our presence, is there anything from your perspectives that perhaps should be changed, should be modified going forward in terms of anything you see the district attorney's office assisting with? Either of you. I think more to you since you'd be working directly with them. But
First of all, I'll tell you this, based on the last question, we need
You're fine.
a conservative attorney general backing our DEAs up. We need to make it clear we're not going to prosecute certain so-called gun crimes, like why in the world are you dealing with concealed carry anymore when the General Assembly has shot it down, the governor vetoed it? But there's a lot of stuff that our DAs need backup on from Raleigh, and we've had, Democrat attorney generals elected continuously since 1898. They need more backup from Raleigh, from the AG's office. And you look at what happened even with Roy Cooper when he was AG. We were losing crime lab stuff. The state crime lab had gone to hell in a handbasket, and our DAs and our prosecutors and our guys in blue and green. What color is y'all's sheriff's uniform? Green. Green. Guys in green. I'll just say go back to green too. They need help from the state. They need help from the attorney general. And so I'll say that. Turn it over to the sheriff.
Wow, that thing ain't working. So I'll say that we've had a long-standing, good relationship with our district attorney's office. I know we've got some meetings moving forward as DA-elect over here as he steps in. So I know we've already spoke about meeting. I see that continuing in that same direction. So that's
That's good news.
Yeah.
Our
So
DAs are overworked and underpaid. I'll tell you that. It's a fact. Not appreciated enough. Just like law enforcement not appreciated
I'll
enough.
say Marion does have a co-responder model, to my knowledge. So you're saying, just to be clear, the McDowell County Sheriff's Office does not have that same co-responder model with social workers coming to calls.
So no, we do not. I know they were able to get that with some funding through the opioid settlements. We have sought out, to have somebody, even if in-house, for some peer support and stuff like that. Not so much for a response, but I think equally for our law enforcement officers. You think about what we do and see on a daily basis. We're just as susceptible as anybody else to have that support in-house. The days of rub dirt on it, move on. We're trying to get away from that and also take care of our people because the things we do and see. So we actually are working on some things to have some of that, but not in that aspect that we were speaking of, where we would have somebody going with us out on calls. Now we could have them respond to something if we need them and we see that they could assist in a situation, but I don't foresee anywhere where we would.
Is there anything that you have this opportunity to tell my audience and the public at large? Is there anything, your message to the public about the new sheriff in town?
The new sheriff in town. Well, so we're definitely very excited. Nathan, I know he had something he had to be at tonight, so he couldn't be here. But we're just excited. We're it's still very new. We've got a really good team. We've got a good group of men and women, and we're ready to get out here and keep on the same path that we've had, because our prior administration, Ricky, did a really good job, and we want to continue on that path.
Thank you.
Are we good?
If
All
anybody
right.
wants a copy of the PowerPoint, see Julie back there, the lady in black and red.
Thank you all for coming. Grab some snacks on your way out. Again, I want to reiterate that the copy of the Constitution is available. See the table over at